Hello, everyone. Professor Barry here. Just want to provide some feedback on your wikis from week 3. Man, amazing job of both sections. One, the summary section, summarizing kind of things that from the podcast, Tribes and Traders. Interesting, valuable, providing a little bit of, there's academic work in terms of substantiating the importance, the value, and the challenges to creating empathy. That sort of division, right, between us and them, and how that division can be facilitated or bridged. And that consequence of, individuals who are involved in trying to bridge that gap between us and them sometimes are viewed as being a traitor, being a person who's a threat to the well-being of the group. Incredibly informative, incredibly applicable to contemporary life. And of course, we can draw inspiration and draw knowledge from the past to be able to understand kind of contemporary social dilemmas and social issues. So fabulous work on the definition, and then exploring some of the different ideas about what could we do to help facilitate increased empathy between groups, and or what are some of the barriers to that. So I'll just kind of identify and kind of talk about some main themes from your post and responses, to kind of, just kind of reaffirm and to kind of pull out some really central things that you all were talking about. In one group, a person commented that, in the United States, we are not set for empathy to a certain degree. And then that was sort of counterposed with or juxtaposed with another comment about how America is this place of incredible diversity and history, and the ability, the conversations about how to sort of do that work, this developing a consensus of sort of some of our values to help hold us together as a collective unit. So some of the work or some things that we do, a lot of you mentioned education, the value of education, K through 12 education, as being a place to bring people together from members of the community, and to so it's that direct interaction and or learning the history of different groups becomes really important, so we understand the history of various groups within this particular culture. And you definitely could critique, that's the attempt, that's the goal, that's the things that we are doing. Are we doing enough becomes kind of one question. And I think, you could kind of really explore that a lot. Are the voices from different groups adequate in terms of their representation? What issues what history are we learning, and how are we learning history when we are in school? And I think certain groups and their histories, we tell a better story about. Somebody mentioned World War II and so the placement of Japanese in internment camps during World War II. Like that story, a lot of us have been exposed to. And so part of that history is being told. The history of certain groups probably being told. Are we sufficient enough in terms of our exploration of those histories is an important question to examine and evaluate. A couple of people mentioned the social media as being this place, right? A place of an opportunity to be exposed to different groups and their experiences, or different individuals and their experiences. So on the plus side, social media can do that, but on the other side, social media can be this incredibly divisive agent, mechanism of creating sort of this us and them. One person mentioned became really frustrated with post on Instagram and post on different sites, platforms, of individuals making posts that are filled with a lot of anger, disgust, a lot of nastiness towards a different political party. And if for this person is really difficult, it's like, wanting to hear the voice of a particular political perspective, but when individuals in their network are kind of posting things that are filled with so much hate and disgust for the opposition, right, for another political perspective and idea, it's just difficult to engage in empathy when it seems like there's little space sometimes for the willingness for for a group to be able to do that work. Another student commented on, another person commented on within a that it was very important, growing up in a family in which there was, friends were one particular political party and family another. And through that experience, learn to sort of hear and listen and develop empathy for both political parties or people, individuals who are having different political thoughts and ideas. And I thought that was a beautiful example of things that we can do to help facilitate greater conversations, greater understanding, asking questions versus inquisition, asking questions versus damnation, asking questions versus making assumptions, learning to understand versus to demonize and marginalize. Some of you mentioned some ways we can do that is building social infrastructure that facilitate the ability to bring people together in a community. So for example, our schools operate or should be operating to bring members from different parts of our community together in a place so kids have an opportunity to interact with and be in an environment with people from different social backgrounds. One of the challenges today is we're becoming increasingly class segregated, increasingly race segregated, especially in certain communities. Here in Central Oregon, I can see it just since we've lived here for 15 years. The increased class segregation. And once you get to class segregation, you're going to get into race segregation as well. And that's really not helpful for developing this greater sense of community in the collective in terms of that. So working on building social infrastructure in ways that facilitate interaction is an important thing. One person mentioned that, one way to build empathy is firsthand knowledge and experience. Like that's the best way, like real direct interaction with individuals who've experienced something. No argument here about that. I think that's, for sure, firsthand experience, direct knowledge. If we can't get that direct knowledge, I think we seek out information, right? We seek out information, try to access those stories through different means and mechanisms, whether that's through reading or through watching films, through our own kind of thought process and inquiry and kind of wonderment, doing research, investigation, and keeping an open mind is an important part. Somebody mentioned, on the opposite side, what inhibits empathy is isolation. When we become isolated from different groups, when there's hate being communicated about particular groups, increased hate, and a lack of information or misinformation about different groups and their experiences. I think that's points well taken. One person mentioned there's sort of this distinction between cultural perception and cultural reality. Cultural reality, I need to sort of make this sort of distinction that people may believe a certain thing about a particular group. This gets us into some application about social construction of reality and who's constructing reality. I can think about, for example, immigration and immigrants. There's this narrative and this myth and this story that dominant culture tells about immigrants, and that it feeds into a cultural perception. And that can be far different than the reality, right? And that cultural perception is developed for political reasons, for social reasons. There's a lot of things that are going on there that may be shaping that. And it's important to question, to investigate, and to develop a more objective way of sort of viewing the world. I'm watching a Netflix video right now, a documentary called Crack. It's about sort of the crack epidemic or crack problem issue in the 1980s, 1990s. That really impacted communities of color in the inner city. And it's really taken an empathetic view of individuals who were both involved in terms of being the drug dealers, trafficking drugs in those communities, as well as individuals who were caught up in terms of the use of crack in those communities and the injustices that were kind of going on in so many different levels, from the macro down to the micro within that. I think after watching, that video, I know that history fairly well, but it's really important and valuable to hear and understand kind of for me was interesting, the drug dealers and the traffickers of drugs in that community, to hear more about what was their motivations, how did they engage in that, in that trade, and why, and their motivations and sort of how it transformed incredibly quickly. Doesn't mean I have any sort of, agreement or disagreement with sort of a person's decisions that they made. It's about understanding. During a time period, the crack scare, it was a cultural perception that was generated that people in the inner city, Black and brown people in the inner city, who were caught up in that were bad. They were, there's little no space for pushing up against that sort of vantage point and perspective. It was this real demonization of individuals in those communities, which really impacted, I think led to, a model of incarceration and sort of real throwdown of the criminal justice system in those communities. And rather seen it as a public health problem. Whether that's the public health problem for the users or public health problem related to violence that's sort of reflective of the drug trade itself. Empathy is powerful. Empathy is threatening in that regard too, because empathy threatens the status quo. Okay, so I don't know, just a couple other things. Collaboration. One person mentioned that children do not have the kind of judgment that we develop later. And so kind of highlighting that it's learned, and that we learn it in context. So culture becomes important, social group becomes important in terms of what and how we learn. That was a really cool story one student told about one of their grandchildren and being at a place where being exposed to somebody who's communicating in a different language. And the person kind of, said to their grandkids, like, hey, ask them about their language, or rather than approaching it from a sense of like, oh, they're odd or they're strange. It's like they're part of our community, right? And it's like it's like, break down those barriers, open up conversation. I thought that was like super cool. Increasing empathy is increasing unity. Language, a couple of people talked about language, symbolic interactionism. I think that language of us versus them, who is us, who is them. Language can, we could look at language systems and it can give us an indication of how we're defining those boundaries between us and them. And that language, sometimes we need to change that language to be more humanizing. I can think of language around immigration and immigrants sometimes can be very dehumanizing and very problematic because it just sets the stage for creating this sort of us versus them. Crack cocaine scare of the 1980s, 1990s. There's definitely a lot of language crackheads, thugs, super predators, which is a language that politicians started to use from both the political left and the right. To view these individuals in these communities as being super predators was inflammatory, emotionally laden. It very much was about political advantage and gain and it created a lot of division and separation and dehumanized groups of people that we continue to pay consequences for. So great job overall in terms of grades. If you provided nice, thorough content, section 1 and section 2, 15 out of 15, and then the post in terms of responses, the majority, responding to at least the majority of your peers and with sufficient attention, 10 points. If there are points taken off as either from either not providing the post or not providing a thorough enough kind of investigation or description of in section 1 or 2. If you have questions about your grade, let me know. I'd be more than happy to send you an email. I want to make sure you're getting the feedback you need in order to be on track for the next go round. If you have any questions, let me know. Thanks for the great reads in your posts. Informative and engaging. Have a good rest of the week. Keep me posted if you have any questions. All right, take care.